Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Fanoos Magazine. I am interviewing the Erica Rivera, aka Sadira, in our dance community for our March Fusion issue. And honestly, I could think of nobody better than you, Sadira.
Oh, oh my God, it's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I've gotten to know you and work with you at festivals, and I've seen you perform at different events. And what I love about your fusion is that you really are truly a mix of different influences. How would you describe your fusion style?
Well, my fusion process is really a dynamic blend of various styles. Like traditional belly dance, that's how I started, was with traditional belly dancing. Some contemporary movement. There's hip hop influence. Even a little Latin in there, because my first dance form that I had experience with was Latin styling, being that I'm Puerto Rican. So I didn't learn in the classroom, but I did grow up dancing to Latin music, which also heavily has an African influence. And I feel like I've just kind of taken all of that, and my fusion style now is a combination of pretty much everything that I've either learned or experienced in my lifetime.
That is incredible. And I know that that's not easy. And I also know that you happen to teach classes. Is that correct?
That is correct. I teach a few.
So when you go to teach classes, assuming it's infusion, I think a lot of teachers struggle on how to approach this, especially with beginner students, because it can be so complex and so detailed, and it can also be kind of muddled up in some way. How do you approach teaching fusion?
So when I teach my classes, my approach is it's centered around fostering creativity and self-expression. But I do encourage students to explore different movement dynamics, experiment with musicality, cultivate their own individual style. But and as you and we've had conversations before, technique is also important, and where the dance is coming from is also important. Sometimes I will watch a fusion dancer and they may piece things together and call it fusion, but it almost seems like a sentence with different topics that don't go together, if that makes sense. So it's kind of disconnected rather than being a blend of hybrid cultures. So when a student is in my class, and it may be someone that is not familiar with fusion, although I want to foster that creativity and self-expression, I want them to understand where the dance is coming from, whatever dance that is that they're trying to blend together. Like I mentioned earlier, traditional belly dance, like Oriental dance, is really where my roots are from. And from there, I would say I kind of graduated into what was known as ATS, now Fat Chance. And then from there, built on what my modern fusion take is today. So I slowly built while also cultivating the cultural influence. Whereas today, sometimes, I have students come in that just want to do the thing and don't have a lot of interest in the foundation. So my approach in my classroom is definitely to start from the beginning. Where's the movement coming from? What culture is this influenced by? And how can we then foster that creativity and self-expression in that dance?
I could not agree more. And yes, it's so complex. And since you do have so many influences, but mostly, like you said, Oriental, traditional belly dance, and then, I think a lot of fusion artists started with Fat Chance, formerly known as ATS. And you start to add more things in as an artist. What would you say is the best way to choose when and where to use what thing so that it doesn't feel disjointed like you alluded to?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because it really comes down to being self-aware and knowing your audience. Balancing traditional and fusion dance styles requires a nuanced understanding of each form's cultural context and aesthetic principles. So, if I'm at a restaurant, for example, and I'm hired to belly dance at said restaurant, first of all, is what kind of food are they serving? Is it Indian food? Is it, and I know this sounds silly, but is it Lebanese food? Like, what are they serving? What is the aesthetic of said restaurant? Like, I'm not going to go into, for example, a Greek restaurant and do a hip hop fusion. You know what I mean? So I definitely want to pay attention to the location. What culture am I there to appreciate? And same with staged performances, like what is the audience? One really good example, actually, I did a 80th birthday, and it was an Indian birthday, and the traditional Arabic belly dancing may not have been their thing. So asking questions, I mean, ask, don't assume. So I asked what would be appropriate. Is the traditional belly dancing really what they were looking for, or did they want me to include something that is involved in the Indian culture? Because sometimes fusion does have Indian influence. Would they be okay with that? I specifically, like, for that particular example, I don't wear a bindi really anymore. You won't see me wear that when I'm dancing. When I was younger and I didn't know any better, I wore it decoratively because I saw other fusion dancers and other improv dancers doing that. But as I studied more and more the meaning behind wearing a bindi and how it's important to Hinduism and Buddhists and, a lot of other Indian subcultures, I decided not to wear that anymore because I'm like, it doesn't resonate with me, so, and I don't want to disrespect, I don't want to go into an Indian wedding or a birthday party and wear a bindi and disrespect that culture. So asking questions is always good. Um, but yeah, it just comes down to using your best judgment, whether you're walking into a public space like a restaurant or a private party like this particular birthday that I did.
I think that's excellent advice, and that actually leads me to another really good question, which is that, like the bindi, for example, but there's also been trends in fusion, or as it was called, tribal fusion, which we've kind of shifted away from saying that. But I remember, something that was a little bit more steampunk looking, very vintage. What I kind of thought of was more like pirate wear at one point. Being from Tampa, there was a lot of people dressing as pirates, and that's what it reminded me of. But like, would you use the same process when you're picking your costuming pieces? In my mind, I kind of equate it to, there's what I know is trendy in Oriental cabaret belly dance costuming, and then there's what the gig may call for. Like, how would you process that as a fusion dancer?
Yeah, I mean, I would say similarly to my last response. For example, there's a lot of conventions. Like recently, we had MegaCon in Orlando, which is an anime convention, and I was asked to perform at that location. And there's a lot of cosplay that happens. And the particular performance that I did, it was more of a dark steampunk look. So really, again, it just comes down to asking questions, making sure that it is what you're deciding to wear goes with the aesthetic of the performance of the other people that you're dancing with, your audience. And and then there's, so far I haven't run into this issue, but if you don't feel comfortable with integrating belly dance with a particular theme, then don't. You're feeling convicted for a reason. In this particular instance, I did not feel convicted. I felt that it was okay to use. I personally used a little bit of improv with this particular gig where we were wearing steampunk. But I normally will ask whoever the organizer is to announce what it is that I'm doing, rather than just, this is a dark steampunk dance. No, no, no. Like, at least educate the audience. I like to educate the audience. What you just saw was, or what this person is about to demonstrate is. This way they know that it's not just a gimmick, even if you are dressed as a pirate or, a steampunk person, or you're cosplaying an anime character. I like to take those opportunities to educate your audience.
So shifting gears just a little bit, I did introduce you in the beginning as the Erica Rivera, as you're also sometimes known, because you also do other things in your life outside of dance that I think are super admirable as an entrepreneur, including running a nonprofit. Can you tell us about that nonprofit that you run?
Sure, sure. So I run a nonprofit called the National Care Foundation, and CARE stands for Center for Advocacy, Resources, and Equity. So our mission is to advocate for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence by connecting them with resources and services that will better their quality of life. And this is a mission that's super important to me because to be honest, I went through a few traumas myself when I was younger. I was sexually assaulted, and I've also been in a DV situation. And one of the things that I would say helped me cope and really handle that trauma was belly dance. But at the time, I couldn't afford belly dancing. I was homeless and I had gotten abused, and my story is pretty intense. We'll save that for another interview. But real quickly, I was a homeless teen, went through these certain traumas and was looking for an outlet to cope with what I was going through. And belly dance became that outlet, but it was very hard to afford it when I was trying to get back up on my feet. So, one of the influences behind the National Care Foundation was, how cool would it be to provide a resource like that to our community free of charge? So, one thing that I would like to do in the near future is offer, for example, a belly dance class to a survivor or survivors in the community, so that they can use that as an outlet. But it's not limited to belly dance. I'm a victims advocate, so we do offer a peer to peer support group. We try to help place survivors that may have had to leave their homes because of domestic violence. Yeah, there's just a multitude of things that we do. And we actually have a fundraiser coming up in April in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So that's just the gist of it, but there's quite a bit. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Fanoos Magazine featured Francesca Sabea, who does Shimmy Mob a couple issues back. Like, this is such a prevalent issue. It's so important to talk about it, and the services that you're providing and continuing to build on are very influential and, in my opinion, like not talked about enough. So yeah, I'm gonna
It's definitely not talked about enough. And belly dancing, even though to some who may not understand it, may see it as an exotic dance, it actually helped me with body image after my sexual assault. It helped with my self-esteem and my confidence. And I really feel like it's a lifesaver. And, hopefully we can continue to provide voice and visibility to some of those issues, especially for people that are not ready to talk about it yet.
Absolutely. And I know that running the nonprofit is in and of itself a very daunting challenge. And part of that is that you do a lot of talks and you do a lot of wellness seminars and sexuality talks and interviews. And would you say that that too is also part of your dance life? Do you see a bridge between those two factors?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I do educate on sexual health. I felt that sexual health education was the biggest aspect when it came to sexual assault prevention. Because we talk a lot about sexual assault recovery, and belly dance is part of my healing, it's part of my recovery, but we don't talk about how to prevent sexual assault. And to me, sexual health education is such a big component, whether that's talking to teenagers about healthy relationships or coaching adults that are married on how to keep their relationship healthy, because sometimes things go sour. Let's face it, no relationship is perfect, but we want to do what we can to avoid, especially domestic violence situation. Belly dancing, especially when I dance, when I perform, a lot of what you see now is a result of my healing journey. It's a result of being integrated in sexual health and making sure that I'm physically, sexually, mentally healthy. My very first solo had a lot to do with my mental health because it wasn't easy. I would say it wasn't easy going into the belly dance community as a young, at the time, 19-year-old. So I use a ton of those experiences and a ton of what I've learned in my dance for sure.
So, with this wealth of experience that you have, and you have so many influences in so many different ways, not just your styles in your dance, but also in your business expertise and in your health and wellness expertise, that's very effective on your dance. And we've already seen fusion kind of morph over the years as a lot of conversations have come up and a lot of things have kind of been, how do I say, brought to light. How do you handle conversations about things like cultural appropriation, gender bias, and these kind of topics that we've been talking about, knowing that you have this really rich background on some of these topics?
So I think conversations on cultural appropriation are important and require sensitivity, respect, and cultural knowledge. So I feel and I could be I this is my opinion. Sometimes I feel like the knowledge isn't there. Like people are not doing their research, and I feel like we need more of that. Like I think fusion is going to continue to evolve. I think, it's going to continue to grow, but I'm trying to put an importance on the cultural competency. So, and I try to think of it this way. I'm Puerto Rican, and I grew up dancing salsa, merengue, bachata, and there's certain things that we do in our culture that are, specific to like how we grew up. How would I feel if someone just came and took that dance and just did whatever they wanted with it? Like I try to put myself in the shoes of those who may be from the Middle East and see what we're doing with this dance. Would that be okay in my heart? Like, does that, you know, I understand appreciating the culture, but I think the only way to truly appreciate it is if you actually study the culture. Like, for example, the thing with the bindi I mentioned earlier, and that's just the easy example. I actually started researching, like, why are we wearing this? Like, is it just decorative or does it mean something? So because I've had people ask me, like, don't you feel like you're appropriating? Because I do. I fuse belly dancing with hip hop. I fuse it with Latin dance. I fuse it with all these things. Is that appropriate? And I'm like, well, I chose to actually study the culture, study where these dances came from. And like I said, I'm very transparent when I perform as to what culture I was influenced by. So I don't necessarily say I'm a practitioner of XYZ. I say I am influenced by XYZ. You have to pay respect to that culture. As far as like gender and things like that, I'm like, to me, anyone should be able to dance regardless. I'm really heavily involved with the LGBTQ community, so I'm always going to feel that it's important that everyone has the same access to the same art forms and are able to, express themselves in that way if they so choose to. I know that, for example, male belly dancers aren't as popular here in the US, but I would like to see more of it. I really would. And I commend those who, go to class and learn, knowing that it is a it's highly done by females more than anything else. I actually had a male in my class recently and I was super excited. But but yeah, so I think just honoring and acknowledging the cultural origins is the best way to handle those conversations. And like I said earlier, if you're feeling convicted in some way before you do some, a dance, listen to that gut feeling. That's gonna steer you in the right direction. I don't think you should ever go against that if you're feeling convicted about a dance.
So, from your business entrepreneurship, pitching teaching classes to studios is already a thing. It's already a trial for most of us as dancers, even going into most studios and saying that you want to do belly dance. Most people don't even know what belly dance, quote unquote, might be. Even I myself, I'll use myself as an example. Most people think that belly dance in my area is from India. So it's already a conversation about what exactly I'm going to come in and teach. With fusion being so complex and maybe having a different aesthetic and having a different demographic, what advice would you give to those that really want to go teach and they're engaged in these struggles with maybe owners that aren't sure what they're teaching? What would you tell them to say?
So I personally, when I've approached studios, again, it's a teachable moment. So I do let them know that, because when it comes to teaching Oriental, I still use it as a teachable moment because, like you said, a lot of people tend to think like, oh, it's Indian or it's Bollywood. I let them know that's not the case. That this particular dance originated in Egypt and Turkey and has that influence. If they have further questions and I go through the whole spiel, like, and then it went to Africa and we, so I've done that. But if they're just looking for a quick, like, what is it that you're teaching? What is this about? I let them know it's an ancient art form from the Middle East. As far as fusion is concerned, we fuse different modern dances into this particular style. And I do give the examples of hip hop or contemporary dance. For me specifically, because I do a lot of pop and lock in my dancing. And normally by then they're like, oh, okay, so this isn't just like the Shakira thing you see on TV. And I'm like, no, it can look that way, but that's not what fusion is per se. And so definitely give examples. I have clips of myself that I can send. So I would definitely advise that someone wanting to teach fusion try to have an example to send a studio owner. They'll also see what I've noticed with studios. Once they see that, they actually feel comforted in the fact that fusion is not as glamorized as Oriental dance, because sometimes studios worry about, is it exotic? Do I have to worry about like too much skin or this? Or what if we have a younger person in the classroom? Because some studios allow teenagers to take classes. They worry about that. And once I've shown them a clip of what fusion looks like, it tends to look a little bit more conservative. And I think that's comforting for some studios. So that's my approach typically, is teachable moment and having an example.
That is really good advice, and that last part is actually something I had not thought of. That's a good point. You are correct. Where do you see fusion heading? We've talked about it already having morphed a whole bunch of times, and I think one of the questions hanging in the air in the community is where are we going with this?
Well, I think that a lot of people are becoming more uh there there's a lot more bravery now. Like before I felt like we had this structure, but I feel like now people are pushing the boundaries of belly dance and fusion and kind of, using that outlet to express their creativity however that may look like. So I think it's going to continue to evolve and grow. But my thing, like I said earlier, is, I'm hoping that it doesn't continue to be disconnected though. Like I said, if if you're reading a book and a particular sentence, it just looks like a bunch of ideas put together that don't belong. Sometimes I see that type of phrasing in some of the fusion dancers that are up and coming. And I feel like we need to work a little bit harder in making sure that there's a blend, that there's a hybrid, and that people are acknowledging the culture so that it doesn't look disconnected. I think that if you're going to fuse belly dance with another dance form, that you not just study belly dance, but study that other dance form. So don't just grab something that you saw on TikTok and throw it into your belly dance choreography. So, um, but again, that's just my take on it. And I know that some people are going to disagree with what I've said during this interview. And that's okay. That's okay. And that's what different perspectives are for, is so that we can learn where everyone else is coming from before we form our own opinion. And but that just happens to be mine. I think it's going to continue evolve and grow. I mean, we have goth style belly dancing, that dark fusion that came out long time ago. I remember when Alicia from Bellycraft was doing goth fusion, and I think that that's evolving some more. I think the cosplay aspect and these conventions, and like I said, I think people are a lot more brave now and are wanting to just fuse belly dance with anything. And again, I don't see anything wrong with it, but study what it is that you're putting together.
All right, we're down to my favorite questions. What
Okay.
is your favorite thing about fusion dance?
My favorite thing about fusion, I would say, is the fact that it is an outlet for me. Like, I could be super angry about something and throw on like a metal like rock song, and I could bust out some moves, and it works, you know what I mean? So like, I love that fusion is flexible enough to express any emotion that you are feeling in that moment, whether it's happy, sad, angry. It's so versatile, and you can throw it in with any like genre of song. I love that aspect of fusion for sure. The flexibility of the emotion, and just, yeah, that creative expression.
All right, and what is your least favorite thing, or is there anything that you're not as much of a fan of with fusion dance? I know, these are tourist questions, but
So I'll say two things. Definitely the disconnect that I see sometimes in our community. Yeah, I just it yeah, anyways, the disconnect. And just as a belly dancer in general, getting ready for a show annoys me sometimes. So I'm that person that I love to dance. I want to get on stage. I want to do my thing, but the prep is not so fun for me. I think, some people thrive in it. They love to prepare. I'm pretty OCD, so I can't say I don't like to prepare. I love to prepare, but I'm not super keen on like hair and makeup and things like that. It's not something I particularly enjoy. I do it, but I definitely love the dance more than I do the prep time.
all right, now, last question, ready? What advice would you give to, I'm going to put this in two different questions. What advice would you give to someone who is starting out in fusion, and what advice would you give to someone who is advancing in fusion and might feel a little lost?
I would say to someone that's interested in fusion dance, um, oh, hold on. I just lost the window that I was talking to you in. Okay, hey. All right, so I would say that if you're just starting out, definitely stay curious. Do your research, see what styles of dance speak to you. Obviously, if you're going into fusion, then you may have already belly danced or taken a belly dance class. and you're curious about fusion, um, definitely stay curious and do the research. Don't just expect to jump in, take one fusion class, and boom, now you can, dance on stage and all that. No, learn about it. Learn the musicality too. We didn't discuss that too much, but it's not just about the culture, it's also about the musicality and counting and where to put certain movements. You may not put a chest circle in a section that calls for staccato movement, for example. So I think it's really important too, as a beginner, to study musicality and learn how to song map, even if it is to a modern song. And as far as someone that's already had some experience and maybe they've reached a plateau, or maybe they're stuck, they're not sure where to go from where they're at. I've actually been there before. I took a little hiatus because I wasn't sure where to go anymore with my dance journey. One of my mentors had stopped teaching, and I was like, oh my God, what do I do now? Like, w- how do I keep growing? Where do I go? So definitely, if you're in that situation, researching teachers in your area or even outside of your area where you can challenge yourself. So try not to stay stagnant, in my opinion. So that's what I did, is I researched other instructors. I saved up money to go to different festivals and things like that. And I would pinpoint which instructors kind of had the style that I was seeking, and saying, okay, I should take a class with her. That's going to challenge me to get to the next level. And also, if you're an advanced dancer who's doing that, it's a good influence for your class. If you're someone that's teaching, as a teacher, you can also stay stagnant sometimes and you have no inspiration. You're like, where do we go from here? Definitely researching instructors that's going to challenge you to get to that next level. You may take one workshop and boom, you're totally inspired and you know exactly what you're going to do in your own classroom for the next 8 weeks. So definitely, for both the beginner and the advanced dancer, staying curious and just continuing to reach to that higher level, always challenging yourself.
I think that is fantastic advice, and I could not agree more. Sadira, thank you so much for being our cover story for Fanoos Magazine for March for the first Fusion issue. It's something I've been wanting to do with the
I'm
magazine for a while.
I'm beyond honored. I'm just so happy and so thankful that you have given us a platform. I say us, the Fusion community, a platform to speak on this topic. And I can't thank you enough. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You are most welcome, and thank you. All of Sadira's teaching information and classroom information, performances, entertainment will be down below this video in the cover story. Again, thank you so much. Give her a follow, and we'll see you next time at fanoosmagazine.com. So this is part two. I gotta tell all the viewers out there, like a lot of times when I do these interviews, we keep talking after I press the stop button, and we start talking more about what we were talking about. And one of the reasons that I really wanted Sadira to be part of this fusion issue is that I've known Sadira from doing a lot of events, and she and I see eye to eye in so many ways. And that might be shocking to some people because I'm like an Egyptian style dancer. But as somebody that loves the art form and loves art, like I love art, I'm an artist first, Sadira and I can have conversations about things that are happening in the community or things that we've seen or stuff that we've experienced. And it's never it's never an argument. It's never a fight. It's never, well, you're just traditional. Well, you're a fusion person. And we used to see that stuff all the time, especially on the Facebooks where people were just attacking each other.
Right. Right. This is just a paint, like basically my style is a painting. You can appreciate what I painted. It doesn't mean that that's how you paint or draw.
Right.
So, as long as it's done tastefully, like we mentioned earlier. And I love that we're doing a part two because during part one, we talked a lot about cultural appropriation, and a lot of the questions kind of steered us back to that, which is important, which is super important, though. And I think when fusion in its early days, there were a lot of people that were doing it and did not necessarily acknowledge the culture. And, I have to commend Carolina for changing a lot of the vocabulary for fat chance and becoming more culturally sensitive, not calling a hand florio, like now it's a wrist rotation, calling it what's anatomically happening. And I kind of agree. I agree with this. Um, and just to share with your audience, one of the things that I brought up with Oriana was I was reading an interview online where someone else described it almost better than I did. They were talking about the fusing of dances. I don't think this person was a belly dancer per se. I think they were just talking about fusion in general. And, she had asked, when you think of flamenco, do you think of hand florios or percussive, foot stomps or hand clapping? Is that the only thing you think about? Or do you think about Southern Spain and Andalusia? Do you think about those historical contexts? And one thing that's also, and of course, I'm going to want your input on this, but one thing that's also a little bit of a like, oh my gosh, is the fact that cabaret dancing is a fusion. So there was a lot of influence in ballet and ballroom, even in the Prohibition era. We had burlesque influence, which is how we came up with the Braun belt set. And, when you think of ballet, do you think of point shoes and arabesques? Is that it? The movement? No, no. Do you consider the legacy of King Louis the 14th and the elite Europeans that gave ballet its first stages? And that's what I meant by cultural acknowledgement in part one, is that it's not just about the movement that you're doing, it's about the culture that fostered the growth and the existence of that dance form.
Exactly. Yes. And I think, like I was telling you, I had Corey Zamora, the legendary AMCAB dancer, come in and substitute one of my classes because I wanted my students to know and understand that, like, we're not saying fusion versus purity. There's really no purity left. Like, everything has been influenced by other things. And especially when we're talking about cabaret, quote unquote, belly dance, you're looking at something that was formed in a time of massive immigration. So you had a lot of different influences which changed the music, the venues, what was being looked for in entertainment, who was providing that entertainment and for whom. And so even if we look at AMCAB as a quote unquote fusion, and I'm not saying fusion as in like what we know as fusion belly dance, but fusion in the real sense of the word, it is an amalgamation of a lot of different movement vocabularies, musical stylings, influences in terms of languages, and everything, including costuming. So it's not that fusion has never existed in any other way, or it does not continue to exist in any other way. I think, when tribal fusion kind of first came around, it was because people wanted something new and fresh, and there was a lack of resources in kind of an inability to Google things and check stuff.
And now we can check. So I'm like, there's no excuse. But yeah, and one thing that drew me to fusion early on was that I almost felt some styles. I almost felt like some styles were closer to the root of where belly dance came from. I noticed a lot when improv was becoming very popular, there was a lot of that folkloric aspect to it that I don't get to see as much with Oriental dance. And I was very much attracted to that. And, I didn't mention that in part one, but that's one of my favorite aspects of fusion is that truly, if you are being culturally sensitive, there's some really beautiful folkloric dance forms in there. And I even had mentioned earlier how lineage is also very important in dance, who you're studying from. So if you're someone that feels like the culture is important, then you need to be looking for an instructor that values that, because we have some students out there who take classes from someone that may not care as much about where the dance is coming from. And really that's just going to allow more fusion dancers to multiply that have a disconnect with their phrasing. So I'm grateful because my fusion mentor was Lacey Sanchez, and Lacey Sanchez is directly under Rachel Bryce, and we all know Rachel Bryce, and that just I did my research so that I could continue being a part of a lineage where that culture was appreciated. So that's one piece of advice I would give a new dancer is making sure that you understand where your dance is evolving from. So who do you want, what lineage are you wanting to be a part of? It's not like when we're born, we don't get to pick, who our ancestors are, but in dance, we do get to choose. So choose wisely.
That's a really good point. And I will say, you did say something really poignant in the first part that I should have elaborated on, which is that the aesthetic was really driving fusion for, I would say, like its early incarnations. Because when I was just starting to take dance, a lot of people don't know this, but I didn't start dance until I was 21. I didn't have dance in my background. I was a painter, I was an artist.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that drew me to tribal fusion, as it was called then, was the costuming, because I never felt I would fit in with the glamour and the thin aesthetic and the very skin exposed kind of look that was in Oriental dance at that time. And that's also something to really consider, is like you and I have talked extensively about costuming. Just because something's trendy, or just because this seems to be what everybody's wearing, we need to consider that not only are potential students looking at this, but also our audience. And there's a time and a place for everything, really.
Yeah, that goes back to in part one when we were discussing how to choose what to wear at a certain venue or a certain event, especially with fusion. And um, I've noticed that some cabaret costumes nowadays, because I do perform cabaret, I know that this is a fusion interview, but I've noticed when shopping for cabaret costumes, we have some that are looking more and more like lingerie, where, you might see the garter, you may see higher slits than what we're used to, like when, we first started dancing. A lot of what I thought, excuse me, that I thought wasn't allowed when I first started dancing now seems to be allowed. And I don't know when we decided that, but it's just how we how we evolved. And again, that's okay, but it's time and place. Is that really
Right.
a type of costume that you would wear to an 80th birthday like the one that I went to? Probably not. But yeah, you could wear it maybe at a club, a hookah bar, something like that. So you have to like be aware, like, is your costuming going to fit in with the audience and the aesthetic that you're going for? Something that looks like lingerie is not, in my opinion, not appropriate for like an older birthday party, or it. ask questions. And with the fusion, you know, similarly, you know, we talked about the steampunk and this and that, you know, are you going to wear a, you know, like devil horns and like goth aesthetic to a children's event or a children's festival? You know what I mean? Because I belly dancing is family friendly. So be aware of what you're wearing to a family-friendly event versus, you know, a MegaCon, you know, an anime convention where wearing horns might be okay. So, you know, you just have to be really, really self-aware. It takes a lot of self-awareness to really decipher what you're going to wear and how you're going to wear it. We talked earlier about turbans. You know, turbans are also that's very cultural, and you have to be careful not to appropriate that. And when I first learned how to wear one, you know, what I appreciated was Lacey was actually the one that taught us how to tie a turban, but she went over, you know, the historical context of a turban. It wasn't just let's do it because it looks good. You know, I don't feel like anything should just be taught because it's aesthetically pleasing. So yeah, so definitely, you know, it's everything. It's what you wear, it's the dance, it's musicality, it's the language. You mentioned language earlier, looking up the lyrics. Make sure you know what you're dancing to.
That's a major point with me is the lyrics. Anybody that knows me knows I'm like, I will at least translate it enough to tell my students like this is what they're saying in the song at the very least. But you know, we even have Professor El Swifi on staff with the magazine in order to get those translations. But you know, fusion will often use non-Arabic songs too, and like maybe Baltic languages or I've heard Russian, I've heard indigenous languages. That stuff, it is important. And, you know, going into that, going into, you know, like really popular bands like Beats Antique tends to also fuse their music, which means it's appropriate for fusion dance. But you also have to look at what music are they fusing. Some of that is very indigenous, some of that is very Baltic sounding. Some of it is completely different instrumentation, and that factors into your movement vocabulary alone of how you're going to interpret that.
Right, right. Yeah, like I'm currently, and this was one of the first questions you asked me in part one, but I'm currently really influenced by Ebony. Ebony does a lot of like urban, I like that she calls it urban technique and not necessarily hip hop, urban technique. And I know that she has danced to like EDM and I have a soft spot for dance music. So I look at that and you know, I have had to look up lyrics to certain songs that are from other like European countries, like the Russian sounding like EDM. There's a lot of dance music in those countries. And so I tend to look up lyrics, and I think that's super important. I don't think enough people do that. They just think like, "Oh, but this is the kind of music I like and I'm just going to dance to it." But if you don't understand what they're saying, like you could offend someone depending on what space you're performing in. So,
Well, we've all seen those TikTok trends where something gets really
oh,
popular and then someone's like, you do know what they're saying, right?
yes. And that's why like earlier I mentioned TikTok. I'm like, don't just take something you learned and insert it into your choreography. Like, where is it coming from and what did you just dance to? And that's the thing, things become super trendy. I get it, like dance classes can be expensive. I've been there. I've totally been there. And sometimes, you know, there are opportunities to learn online, like YouTube. TikTok has a lot of different trends. And I think that's okay to a point, you know, but just make sure that you're still researching whatever it is that you've learned for free on the internet. You know, is it appropriate for what you want to use it for?
Right. Yeah. At the very least, you know, throw it into Google and, you know, also I always tell my girls like throw it into YouTube and see what other people have danced to it with. Like just get different perspectives on the movement and then we'll break it apart and we'll look at it too. Because it doesn't mean that everything you see online is even correct. But, you know, I was telling you, I attended a really, really good lecture with Donna Mejia at Belly Dance Masters when they used to have that in Orlando. And her lecture was all about you can like things. You're allowed to like things just because it's not part of your culture or you're not an expert in it. You are allowed to like things. The disconnect is when you start picking and plucking, and that's how we end up with people wearing headdresses at Coachella because they think it looks cool, and that therein lies the discussion of like, this is inappropriate and here's why. you know
Yeah. And I do see that a lot at like, because I like EDM and that is very much in that culture. I went to EDC last year and the amount of people I saw just like either wearing the headdress or, they have their pashminas and I get it, like I get it, but how many of these people are actually like do actually know what they're doing? Like, have they done their research or are they like, oh, this is cool, everyone's doing it, I'm gonna do it too.
right.
It's That's the difference. Like, I don't mind seeing it done, but did you do your research first? Like, do you know the meaning behind what you're doing? And, there's a lot, especially in the dance community, that happens quite a bit. I went to Burning Man last year, and that's another location where you do see a lot of different cultures being pulled in, but it makes me wonder, like, okay, but are you actually practicing that religion? Are you actually wearing this because you're of that culture? It's hard to tell. So people need to be careful.
Yeah, and this isn't like by any means, viewers, like, I feel like I've seen so much disparaging arguments and just knockdown, drag out fights online about fusion.
Yeah,
And
we're not doing that. Like
no, my
we're
gosh,
okay with it. We just want to educate the community,
for
you know?
sure. And let me just point out that nobody is immune because I've also seen Egyptian artists wearing some questionable costumes, doing some questionable things. I've seen, just the spread of the internet means that you're starting to see a lot of different things from a lot of different people. And these topics about appropriation or what's appropriate is because we finally get the chance to communicate with each other effectively and really sit down and look at this with a critical eye and all of our collective education and perspective, and really say, we as belly dancers, what are we portraying? What are we okay with? What are we maybe not okay with? How do we feel about this moving forward? How are we going to handle it? Is it that big of a deal? Are we making too big of a deal of something maybe? Like, we're getting to have these conversations, and I think that's the point. That's
Yeah.
good.
I think we need to continue talking about it. I don't, because we're not, at least me, I'm not here saying that it's, oh my gosh, you need to stop, wearing this or doing that. Not at all. I'm just saying that it's important, in my opinion, to know where these actions are coming from. It's important to know the culture and appreciate that culture because people do ask all the time, what's the difference between appropriation and appreciation?
Right.
I think the difference is being acknowledging the culture. That's the difference. If you're just doing it to do it, then it could be seen as appropriation. But if you're doing it and you understand where that particular costume piece or that particular movement or that particular thing that you're doing, where it came from, then you can truly appreciate it. Then it's not embarrassing if someone comes up to you and says, why did you do that? If you can answer the question, then you are appreciating that culture. So, or, where did that come from? See, for me, I gave the example of the bindi. I would hate for someone to ask me after a performance what the bindi signifies and why I'm wearing it if I can't answer that question. Because I don't practice Hinduism or Buddhism, I chose not to wear it anymore. If other people are still wearing it, cool. I see fusion dancers still wear it all the time. They wear beautiful, large, elaborate bindis, and I think it's gorgeous. I think it's gorgeous. It just didn't resonate with me personally. It represent the third eye, it represent the chakra. It has these representations that just don't resonate with me. So it would have been embarrassing if someone were to ask me after a dance, like, why it's important to me when it's not. Like I think that's worse than just not wearing it. So
I completely agree with you. And you know what? I'll even throw myself under the bus. Here we go, Fanoos exclusive. I'm a white woman. I'm about as white as it gets. I did the DNA test and everything. Like, I don't have a drop of anything that is not European, right? And I had the thought of myself, and I had the little sit down with myself about, I love Saidi. I love Saidi dance, and I love a lot of
me
folklore.
too.
My ex is Saidi. Y'all know my ex, and I had a deep conversation with him because I was going to do a Saidi performance online with Nizana's show. And he's like, oh, you can put the markings that the Saidi women get as the tattoos. And I said, is that really okay? And
Yeah.
he's like, why? It's what they do. And I said, no, is it really okay? I'm not Egyptian. I'm not a Saidi woman. These are not tattoos. I'm using eyeliner. Is that really okay? Like, what's the difference between that and what the Amazigh people wear when they have the harku? And we had a really long discussion because it fell into that exactly as you said. Is this appreciation or appropriation? And I am really careful about when I utilize things like that because I need to make sure that the dance I'm about to present is going to be spot on Saidi, and
Right.
that's understood. If I have any question about it or it's part of a set where I'm just pulling out the Asaya but I came in with a Méjancé, it's not
Right.
happening.
And
That's
that's
perfect
such a
example.
good example because like in a lot of fusion, especially improv, they do the same thing with the markings.
Right.
And again, I'm one of the few fusion dancers that really didn't do that because I didn't understand it. Like I'll admit, I didn't know what it meant, so I just didn't do it. I'm just the opposite of most. Like some people may not understand it and still do it because it looks good, where me, if I don't get it, I'm not going to do it. And I didn't get it. I didn't know what it meant. But I saw a lot of fusion dancers doing it, and I always thought to myself, like, should I be doing that? Like, is that what we're supposed to do when we're doing this dance? So that's like a perfect example too, because we're not saying that you can't do it. Just make sure that when you're doing it, it falls in line with what you're representing. If it
Right.
falls in line with what you're representing, then great, do it. And one day maybe I will wear a bindi again. Maybe I'll have a better understanding of what it means and of that culture. And maybe I will do a Bollywood fusion where I feel like it's okay to showcase the bindi and give it that respect. And that's the key word is respect. I can't
Exactly.
give it that respect if I don't understand it.
Right.
So
And then I would conjecture it opens up a beautiful opportunity, for me at least, as a traditional dancer, but even as fusion, no matter what kind of art you're doing, you get to choose
yes, you
when
do.
and how, and it's really going to add to the quality and the artistry of what you're doing. I feel like when we have to talk about appropriation versus appreciation, it very quickly degrades into like, this is bad, this is okay, this is
That's
not good.
not at all what we're doing.
No, it's like, guess what? You have this huge color palette and you get to choose with intelligence when you're going to do what, and it's going to make the painting better. It makes it so much better. It adds to the quality and the depth of it. And even if your audience doesn't know everything or they're not on their phones, like, well, most people are on their phones even during a show now. But even if they're not Googling it real quick, they're actually going to perceive that. People are more perceptive than we think that they are. They may not be collectively super intelligent or know everything or be experts on it. And you might not have someone in the crowd that's from that country, but they're going to be able to tell that you did your due diligence and you did your work, and that you are an artist and you're coming up there and you're doing something.
And honestly, it is the biggest compliment when someone of that culture says I did a good job
Oh,
doing
forget
something
it.
that, yeah,
It's
it's amazing. Like there was the Greek restaurant that I danced at, there were a few Greek families in there, and the gentleman had asked me if I was Greek, and I was like, no, I'm Puerto Rican. And he was like in shock that I was able to dance according to their culture, that my music was Greek. I didn't use Arabic music. And it impressed him. And that's just one example of many. But anytime someone of the culture of something I'm representing says I did a good job, I'm like, and that's why it is important to have that knowledge, to continue to study, continue to be curious, continue to build rather than just doing things for looks. You know, it will show in your dance and people will take notice.
Absolutely. It's okay to look cool, and then what if you could make cool be awesome?
Be awesome.
It'll
Exactly.
be awesome.
Oh, this has been such a good discussion. I'm glad we had a part two.
I'm glad we had a part two also.
Part one, part one was very structured, but like part two is like bang, like
This is very typical of the conversations that Sadira and I have in general, so now you know. And I mean, really, like I do have a comment section, be nice, but we do want to hear your thoughts on some of this because it's so good to be able to talk about it with each other and just, be artists
and
together.
it's okay to disagree. We still want to hear that too. Just, be respectful.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's always nice to hear different perspectives.